Well, lastly, to the most talked about programme of last week, Threads, BBC Two's drama documentary about the effects of a massive nuclear bomb attack on Britain and in particular on the city and inhabitants of Sheffield. Threads is the latest in a series of programmes about nuclear war and its aftermath. The first, commissioned by the BBC in 1965 and then banned from television, was Peter Watkin's The War Game. Last year came Mick Jackson's A Guide to Armageddon, which dealt with the effect of a nuclear bomb dropped above St. Paul's. And then earlier this year we had the American film The Day After, about which some people, including Mr. Michael Heseltine, the Defence Minister, expressed extreme nervousness, but which turned out to be more of a second-rate soap opera. Threads, whatever your view of it, was in a different category. Written by Barry Hines, who wrote Kes, and produced by the same Mick Jackson, it was followed by two contiguous programmes. On the 8th day, a documentary on the climatic changes that a nuclear holocaust might bring about, and a Newsnight debate about nuclear weapons as deterrent and defence. Threads, the title refers to the strands that bind life together in a large city, covered the events leading up to the attack and the 13 years after it, as seen through the lives of two families, the Kemps and the Becketts, whose attempts to survive after the attack make harrowing viewing. Here's Ruth Beckett, pregnant and dazed, as she emerges several days later.
Mandy! Mandy! Have you seen our Mandy? Mandy! Mandy!
Many of the cast of Threads were the townspeople of Sheffield, and they were invited to a private viewing of the film before transmission. Here are some of their reactions to it, as seen on the BBC regional programme Look North.
For some time after the film, there was an eerie tension. People were shocked, waiting perhaps for someone to reassure them, to say this isn't true.
You can see, I didn't think I would have reacted like this, you know, but I just couldn't help it. There's just going to be nothing after, is there? Nothing.
I've got 5 children, and the thought of them suffering in that sort of manner, no, it's just, what can you say?
Because when I was doing it, it was just like it was just a good laugh, you know what I mean? I didn't really think about what it'd be like to see it. And when you see it, it's a lot different.
So
Very
now?
disturbing. I don't know, it's just terrible. It makes you realise how mad it all is and sick. And
I want to die when it hits me, because I don't want to live through anything they live through, not at all. It was horrible. And when the hand was burning, it was really awful, because I thought, you know, everybody's going to get out of it and live and things like all the other films, but it didn't. It was just so realistic.
A Marplan poll conducted for the BBC showed that 92% of viewers said that the BBC was right to show Threads, as opposed to 6% against, and that 38% admitted that Threads had shown them something they had not known before. On the whole, the television critics approved of the decision to show it. Christopher Dunkley in the Financial Times, comparing the showing of Threads with the censoring of The War Game, said that the BBC had redeemed itself for
20 years of funk, obstinacy and condescension, during which BBC officials continued to prevent the British population at large from seeing that horrifying yet necessary work.
Herbert Kretzmer in the Daily Mail said that the recent programmes had seen the BBC
confidently fulfilling its ancient role as a convener and focus of national debate.
But he worried about the film's purpose.
Is there not a sense in which programmes like this, while seeking to alert the populace, succeed mainly in paralysing the will?
In the Times, Peter Ackroyd commented,
"It was not clear if the point of Threads was to frighten or inform. They're not incompatible aims, although I suspect they come under the larger heading of entertainment."
Sean French in today's Sunday Times said,
"By the end, we were a little better informed and a lot more worried. Answers were as far away as ever."
We asked our own cross-section of people, both those who made the film and those with a professional interest in the subject, what they made of it.
Most people have no idea at all, or at best, a very limited idea, or at worst, half-truths in their heads about what a nuclear war might be like. What we were trying to do in Threads was to give a realistic picture to people who perhaps haven't thought about it at all in their lives, what a realistic nuclear exchange might do to the lives of ordinary people.
But what it is, I mean, it's the people in the middle, really. The people who don't know very much, who have not been concerned about it, who have the same attitude as the boy in the film who says, if it happens, I want to be straight underneath it and pissed out of my mind. They're the people I'm concerned with. I think they're the people who ought to know more about it.
I only wish that right at the beginning of that programme it had really been made abundantly clear that it wasn't the documentary, which, frankly, that film rather gave the impression that it was with all the headline titles and the news lines, but that it was pure fiction.
Television should be about the real world, and there is nothing more important in current society than the prospect of a nuclear holocaust. And from that point of view, it's important that television addresses itself to that sort of issue. It's, I think, a fair criticism that British television in the past has rather neglected it, and certainly there will be many people, including me, who will have had their eyes opened by the programmes that we've seen in the last few days.
It was, to me, an intensely emotional experience, and I say this although I am very familiar with these facts. I had to research them for my own work. I know what sorts of things happen, but when you actually see it in terms of human flesh and bones and burnt people and broken buildings, this was to me a very emotional experience, and one that I will remember for a long time.
It's an entirely necessary film. It's difficult for me to talk about the matter of the film because I think the art of the film was that it cancelled all aesthetic distance between the unthinking that now prevails and the unthinkable that it's leading to. What it makes me think of is an analogy, and that is the situation of the Jews in Germany at some time between the breaking of Jewish shop windows and the wearing of yellow stars. I think many of them thought that somehow everything was going to be all right and that what was happening was actually not happening. And I think that right now, we, the human race, are all wearing the star of annihilation on our sleeves, and a film like this makes us painfully aware of it.
I probably approached it from a rather different point of view than most other people who watched it, in that I had seen all the other American films based on the same theme, but I had the advantage, if that in fact is what it was, of having seen nuclear weapons for real. I've taken part in 14 nuclear tests of all ranges, all yields of weapons. So I knew precisely what the effects of nuclear weapons would be if used against a town or a military target, if it comes to that. So when I began to watch the film, my reaction as it went on was, well, what is the film meant to do? Is it meant to frighten people? Is it meant to entertain? Was it simply made to make money? Was it meant to instruct? And if you come to analyze those questions, then you could give a dissertation on any one of them. That it frightened people isn't the slightest doubt. We know that from the phone calls that came in. Did it instruct them? I doubt it. Did it entertain them? Well, there are those who like nothing better than a good gory film, so presumably they were entertained.
Threads was not entertaining, I suspect, for most people who saw it, nor was it intended to be, and I feel very strongly that it shouldn't be entertaining. To use something as important as nuclear war as a vehicle for entertainment is quite wrong. And I'm a little sad that there is a coincidence of Threads, which we started making 2 years ago, and the day after the American movie, because I think you can only take people in their imagination through the horror of a Holocaust once, or at best twice, without getting a kind of law of diminishing returns. It loses its terror.
I couldn't see any political motivation in it whatsoever. And I would go further. I was rather waiting for some vigorous, unfriendly remarks or critical remarks from certain political circles, which so far, as far as I know, haven't come. And I thought that was a very hopeful sign.
The programme hasn't had the effect of getting people to give up hope, because a lot of people have wanted to join and rung up and be active and so on. We have had one or two people, I'm sorry to say, who've rung up in great despair. In fact, one even threatening to commit suicide. Now, whether that was a real threat, I don't know. I hope to God it wasn't. But a lot of people have rung up positively. But I do think, and I repeat myself, I do think that at the end it could have given people a bit more positive direction about the sort of things they could actually do.
Let me emphasize straight away, nobody is going to start chucking 5,000 megatons around this planet. Nobody. Neither the Russians, the Americans, the British, the French, or anybody else. It will simply never happen.
Most important function of the film is that it will help to lower our threshold of refusal. I think right now we listen to and read the most obscene statistics and we accept them. And I think that every time we accept an obscene statistic, we are colluding in the destruction of our planet. I think that we should stop being polite and we should rant and rave and shout and do unspeakable things in the face of unspeakable language.
Well, we've heard what all those other people have got to say about Threads. Now, what do we think? What do you think, Mary Midgley?
Well, I thought it was very impressive, very moving. It was not possible to watch it without being very deeply moved and involved. Although I expected very much this kind of thing and thought on the whole it was underplayed rather than exaggerated, of course it still isn't the same thing to expect it as to see it. I thought it conveyed very well the utter desolation of people who live in so very complex a civilization as ours, where the threads that bind us on all sides are so orthodox, we're so used to them that we just don't notice. Any disturbance of this very complicated system is agonizing, and the sense of helplessness was very well conveyed. I thought they were very good in their justice to the existing system. The people who were trying to administer the city, who went down to the basement of the town hall and tried to run things, did so very honestly, very thoroughly. They were given all the facilities that they would have, and of course there they were trapped in the basement asking for someone to dig them out. They were in fact given the advantage of telephones, which it's likely that they would not have had in this actual case. Similarly, the people who carried out the instructions in the government pamphlet, Protect and Survive, this wasn't guide, there are far odder things in that pamphlet. They did what they were told and at all stages were entirely obedient.
Did you feel you learnt something from it?
Well, I learnt emotionally in the sense of going through the experience of what it's like. Because I've been taking great interest in these things, I don't know that any of the facts were new to me. But I mean, very many people didn't know these things.
What did you think, Edwina?
I think we should remember that it was a drama, not a documentary. It wasn't there for us to learn things from, as opposed perhaps one or two of the other programmes on this week. As a drama, I thought it was brilliant, and the images that it conjured up were very, very memorable. I found that I dreamed about it afterwards, found myself thinking about what I would do were I in that circumstance. So in those terms, I think it succeeded. But I disagreed, as I was watching it, very profoundly with many of the things that it was trying to say. And I kept saying, no, it wouldn't be like that, or that's really taking the most extreme view possible.
I mean, I would like to register one or two thoughts that are purely professional to do with the standard of writing. So it's beautifully written, elegantly written piece of work. And
particularly the early bit, I thought, didn't you?
Well, right across the board. So it was a marvellous imaginative thing that Barry Hines did about the breakdown of relationships and the breakdown of language in the, the aftermath, which is a thing I've not encountered in any bomb plays. So I used to have a rule of thumb that every writer should be forbidden to write a bomb play, a Holocaust play, because the place was getting littered up with bad ones. And Barry Hines is exempt henceforth. I would also like to say a word about the acting, which I thought was extraordinary. I mean, the girl we saw in the extra had a quite extraordinary acting performance, and again, right across the board. I think, having got that far, you then find yourself arguing about two sets of things. One about the film as a piece of art, if you like, and then about the issues. And I think, in a sense, you've got to decide which argument you want to have. I didn't think it was a unilateralist piece. I also felt that Barry took us into areas where we don't normally travel. And in a way, the crucial image of the whole thing was the breakdown of language, because that is another of the threads that we lose.
But that's just a postulation. That's surely just his personal view. It's never happened in any previous pattern of history. And in fact,
we've never had in history anything like this.
The extent to which this is unique is the theme, to my mind. And I don't understand you to have taken on board at all the point about nuclear winter. which is fairly recent, but is not denied by any responsible scientist. There are obviously some doubts about the details, but at present we certainly have to come to terms with it.
And that emerged fairly clearly
Yes.
in the on the 8th day, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes, which I thought was a very interesting programme because it was a documentary. It was very carefully put together with a lot of evidence from all sides in the argument. And I found that actually made me think rather more. It made me feel rather less, but think rather more than Threads itself. Although I do have to say that it seems to me it's all part of a sort of Armageddon industry. I mean, the postulation in the war game, which I did see 20 years ago, was that we would have fireballs and that would burn out the oxygen and, you know, we'd have that sort of problem. And you can go back 2,000 or 3,000 years and somebody's postulating some end of the world in that way.
Mary, I think you wanted to say something more about...
I don't think it's really possible to go on in that kind of way in the face of a lot of perfectly normal scientists proving to the satisfaction of the scientific community that what's likely is a change in the climatic conditions so great as to put an end to civilization and quite possibly to life on Earth. Now, that really is not something habitual. And I was through the last war. I know that many horrors indeed are commonplace and people indeed do forget them, but compared with the suggestion that the entire climate that we know would change to that extent, I don't think this weighs anything. And it seems to me that this is someone who'd worked in the Ministry of Defence just said to me, jolly cheering, because the effect, if people will open their minds to it, is to make it clear that you cannot use nuclear bombs at all. Now, the politicians on Monday said, oh, but that makes no difference. Of course, we never meant to use them. But the point is, if the risks are such as we're now told, you cannot even threaten to use them, because to use them would be suicide and no one's going to be fool enough to believe you. Now, that's new. I was very disturbed by the Monday's programme, at which both the politicians and the experts were indeed very nervous. Now, the audience was nervous too, but what these people were nervous of was that they might have to make some change in their previous views. They might have to admit they'd been wrong somewhere. They were defending it all, they were fencing it in, they were repeating it.
I think the truest thing we've actually heard is that many of these programmes actually don't change prejudices, they confirm them. I remain confirmed in my view that one of the reasons why we have had peace since the whole of my lifetime, and I was born in the months after the last war, is because we do actually have strong defence policies. We have, and they have, and we do actually know what we can do to each other.
How do you all feel now, a week later? I mean, do you feel the thing, a sense of helplessness? Is it beginning to fade from your mind? Do you feel, well, I don't want to see any more programmes like that for a long time?
I want this said again and again and again. I am not without hope of people changing their minds and getting through their prejudices. I think we need to say this as hard as we can and very little else for a time, because it takes a long time to acclimatise and the inertia of habitual policies is very strong. But what I'd like to point out to Edwina Currie and similar people is this isn't a one-sided point. The Russians are dead scared too. One of the very few sensible remarks on Monday's programme was the Russians too are not members of the Kamikaze Club. What nuclear winter investigation shows is that everybody would be dead. There is no one-sidedness to it, and this is what makes it such a welcome change.
That's why the discussion that was held on Monday night was actually the best of all of the three programmes. And the point that was made, that in fact the politics of it all is the key to it. It's not the weaponry, it's not the armoury. It's actually that President Reagan and Mr. Gromyko this week on our television screens have been seen talking to each other. That's the most important thing.
I think at the risk of starting an argument, I thought it was easily the worst of the three programmes.
Yes,
I don't think you can have a good television discussion with 9 people in a studio.
My feeling, in a way, having seen the all the programmes, particularly Threads, was, as you said yourself at the beginning, this was drama. This was not completely fact. It was drama based on certain premises as to what might happen. But it's quite possible that none of those things will happen. You see, I mean, we don't know, and so it was entirely speculative.
Well, it was a personal vision, but that's all an artist can offer, whether it's Leonardo or Barry Hines or anybody else.
Therefore, should you therefore take it as seriously, perhaps, as some people have taken?
Well, if we're talking about what might happen, about something which hasn't happened yet, and which isn't of a kind that you can bring it about in order to film it. There is no alternative but to say what it might be like. Now, I think there are indeed drawbacks to dramatising anything which is very disturbing, and it's quite true that this can be counterproductive and it can simply make us shut our minds. But since the government has sat on all this information for so long and done all it can to stop us knowing, if we want people to know, the fairly violent, shocking methods almost have to be used. I think 'tis pity.
I would have liked to have seen that group of filmmakers make a film about the spirit of people after the Blitz in London and the leadership and the tremendous characters that came out. A much more positive view altogether.
If there's anybody left after what we saw the other night to do that, perhaps that will happen. Edwina Currie and Alan Plater and Mary Midgley, thank you all very much for taking part in this discussion.